In the dark of night, I would advise you not to look out of your window. When you look out the dark windows, you see everything you have ever feared and everything you have ever dreaded. The impossible is possible and exists within the dark void. Nothing can be seen, but everything can be imagined. Ridiculous and surreal faces that look as if they know your deepest, darkest secrets. Decaying heads of the damned that moan and grunt, and all your greatest fears do, in fact, exist out there. But don't worry, you are safe. It's merely a window. You can only see them, but they can't get to you in your dimension. But there is one thing. You are vulnerable out in the open. What do I mean, you may ask? Your reflection. It allows you to coexist with them. Just don't blink. I have been laying in bed for hours. It's 5:30 a.m. now and there's nothing I can do. My parents are staring at me, but I can't bear to look at them. I'm trying not to scream. Their eyes are staring straight at me with their mouths hanging open. I feel paralyzed by fear. I can't let it know that I'm not asleep and there's nobody left to save me. I've been trying to think of a way to escape, because if I stay here, I'm going to die. It's waiting for me to wake up and see what it had done. A few hours ago, I was awoken by loud screams coming from down the hallway. I got up and went to see what was going on. After taking a peek outside my bedroom door, I noticed blood on the carpet. Terrified, I jumped back into bed and hid under the covers. I tried desperately to go back to sleep, and I tried to convince myself that it was just some horrible nightmare. Then, I heard my bedroom door creak open, and I peeked out from under my blankets to see what was going on. I could see something dragging two large bundles into the room. Whatever it wasn't human. I could tell that much. It was thin and hairless. It didn't have any eyes. It was stooped and crooked and crept noiselessly into the room. My eyes adjusted to the darkness and I could make out what it was dragging. It was the bodies of my dead parents. It propped my father against the edge of the bed and turned his head to face me. Then it sat my mother down in the chair and positioned her facing towards me as well. Finally, it started rubbing its hands along the walls, drawing something in blood. It stepped back and I could see it had scrawled a message on the wall. A few hours ago, it was too dark to read. The thing has been standing in the corner for hours, waiting to strike. My eyes have adjusted to the darkness now and I can read the message on the wall. I don't want to look at it. It's too terrifying to think about. But I need to see it before I die. I peek at the message written on the wall. It reads, "I know you're awake." My little brother had an imaginary friend named Tuna. He said she was the size of a thimble. When he stopped mentioning her, we asked him what happened to her. He said he ate her. A middle-aged man named Trevor Bailey had just moved into a new apartment in Seattle. He was in the city shopping for furniture but couldn't find anything that took his fancy. He was a man with taste for unusual furniture, but every furniture shop he entered seemed to have nothing that interested him. Frustrated, he wandered down a narrow side street and eventually found himself outside an old antique shop. On the spur of the moment, he went inside to see if there was anything worth purchasing. He was browsing through the aisles when he came across an odd-looking treasure chest. There and then he decided to buy the curious piece of furniture. Handing over the money, Mr. Bailey asked the antique dealer to have the chest delivered to his apartment that very evening. Hours later, he was sitting on the sofa in his living room watching TV when he happened to glance to his left and saw something that made him gasp. Peeking out of a hole in the side of the treasure chest, he was sure he could see a pair of bloodshot eyes. They seemed to be staring directly at him and glinting maliciously. Mr. Bailey was overwhelmed with a sudden feeling of inexplicable fear and sat motionless for a few seconds. Then, overcoming his terror, he jumped up and ran to the chest, flinging open the lid. Inside, he found the chest was completely empty. Puzzled, Mr. Bailey returned to the sofa and tried to calm his nerves. He told himself that it was just his imagination, but he found it hard to get the hideous image out of his mind. For the rest of the night, he felt strangely ill, at ease, and made an effort not to look at the chest. He was simply terrified at the thought of what he might see. At the end of the night, Mr. Bailey was beginning to forget about his unusual experience and put it down to a trick of the light. Just as he was about to go to bed, he stood up and couldn't resist taking one last look at the chest. He froze and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. There were the hideous eyes. They were peeking out at the same hole as before, staring at him with evil intent. In a state of shock, Mr. Bailey let out a strangled scream and the eyes suddenly vanished from the darkened hole in the side of the chest. When he cautiously approached the treasure chest and carefully opened the lid, he again found it completely empty. By now he was at his wit's end, and he decided that he must rid himself of the mysterious piece of furniture. Mr. Bailey picked up his phone and called a removal service. He told them to come bright and early the next morning. He said he had an old treasure chest that he wanted them to pick up and cart off to the city dump. As he hung up the phone, he breathed a sigh of relief. Feeling a little more relaxed now than he had arranged to get rid of the chest, he went to bed. That night, Mr. Bailey lay in bed, tossing and turning, his brain plagued by a torturous nightmare. In his dreams, he saw the bloodshot eyes again. They were peeking out at him from every crack and crevice in his apartment. The disgusting eyes seemed to follow his every move, and it felt like there was no escape from their evil gaze. He awoke suddenly in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat. His heart was pounding at an alarming rate. The memory of the horrible eyes was tormenting him, and he found himself unable to fall asleep again. Filled with an uneasy sense of foreboding, he got out of bed and tiptoed silently down his hallway. Quietly opening the door to his living room, Mr. Bailey saw the treasure chest sitting ominously in the corner. Everything seemed peaceful and undisturbed, just as he had left it only hours before. But something about that chest still bothered him. When he had gone to bed, he was sure he had closed the lid of the chest, but now it stood open. A sudden chill surged through his body. He felt as if the treasure chest was waiting for him, daring him to approach it. Like a man in a trance, he felt unable to resist and walked slowly towards the open chest. The next morning, workmen arrived to pick up the chest. They found the front door standing open and the old treasure chest standing in the middle of the room. The workmen lifted it onto a dolly and wheeled it outside to the street where the van was waiting. As they loaded the chest in the back of their van, the men never heard the muffled screams coming from inside. As they drove to the city dump, they never heard the desperate knocking coming from the old treasure chest. When they got to the dump, the workmen backed up their van to the edge of a cliff and pushed the chest off the side. It fell straight down, crashing against the rocks and turning end over end as it plummeted to the bottom. With a mighty splash, it hit the water below and sank quickly, disappearing beneath the surface. My daughter had some imaginary friends for a couple of years named Dodo, Ghana, and the Evil. They just sort of appeared out of nowhere when she was almost 3 years old. It started with Dodo and Ghana. Then a few months later, she came up to me with a creepy, expressionless face and told me, "The Evil is coming over today," and she just walked away. It turned out that the Evil was actually a nice imaginary friend. She had just an unfortunate name. They perfected a chip that when you implant it in your brain, it would allow you to read the thoughts of others. At first, everyone was excited, and they all clamored eagerly to get the first few. As soon as they were proven reliable, anyone who could afford it bought one. At first, it seemed perfect. Murderers and criminals were caught easily, and you could judge how a relationship could go on the first date. But we're all human. We think things we don't mean during arguments and fights, so the chip began to cause strains and rifts between families and friends. There was a petition to get the chip removed, and it was successful. Unfortunately, their brains had been altered by the chip. They couldn't stop hearing people's thoughts. Online support groups popped up, and scientists everywhere began researching ways to reverse the effect. It turned out that some random on Reddit had the answer. Circular reasoning maybe, but his solution worked. If you think about what it's doing to your thinking, you stop hearing other people's thoughts. I was always poor. I could never afford the chip. But what I have learned is that if you spend all your time thinking about your brain, your own isn't enough. I can hear them moaning and shuffling outside my door right now, desperate for mine. Rob brings a girl to our annual cottage weekend for the first time in 8 years, rounding out our group to an even 6. Initially, we are wary of including someone we didn't quite know, but it isn't too long before she wins us over with her friendly, laid-back personality. And as a bonus, she brought with her salted caramel cupcakes, an after-dinner treat that we devour as we sit around a campfire exchanging the scariest stories we'd ever heard. "You go first, new girl," we encourage. She shakes her head. "I'd actually like to go last if you don't mind. I want to hear all your stories first." Most of the tales are urban legends. Humans can lick too, aren't you glad you didn't turn out the light, and several versions of a young couple meeting an unfortunate fate while trapped in a car in the dead of night. Then it's her turn. Honestly, stories with blood and gore don't scare me. They're so over the top, so implausible, that they're more ridiculous than they are frightening. "What's scary to me are the mindfucks," she continues, tapping an index finger to her temple. "The unexpected, the unknown. Not ghosts, mind you, or chain-wielding maniacs, but ordinary people like you and I. For example, a stranger spends a weekend at the cottage with her boyfriend and his friends," she says as she holds up an uneaten cupcake, and then feeds them some homemade pastries. He set the needle down gently on the black groove circle and closed the glass top. A crackling hiss came from the speaker system, followed by Beethovens Fifth. "Ah," he said as he poured a glass of wine and sat in his favorite reclining chair. For the next hour, side A of the record played as the man sank deeper into his chair, reminiscing about the week's events, and hoping that side B was just as warm as he remembered it all those years ago. Earlier that day, he found himself in a tiny mom-and-pop record shop in North Seattle, just poking around looking for gems, as was his Friday custom. He was looking in the classical section when he came across the record now playing on his stereo system. Oh, how he had loved this record as a young boy some 40 plus years ago. He carefully took the record out of its sleeve and examined it, followed by the sleeve, and saw the mark. Yes, this was it. This was the record he had given away by accident all those years ago. He hugged it close to his chest and proceeded to the checkout line, paid the teenager cashier with 2 crisp $20 bills, and went home. His thoughts broke as side A ended. He got up slowly, clutching his lower back and stretching as he walked across the now dark room to the record player. With trembling hands full of excitement and fear, he opened the glass on the player, gently removed the record, and flipped it to side B. The man gently set the record down on the player and lowered the needle to the 4th black groove, closed the glass top, and sat back in his chair as that familiar crackling hiss came from the speakers. Muffled screams emanated from the speakers this time, along with a second voice. Now, calm down. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to have a little fun," said the calm, comforting male voice. A muffled shriek, followed by cries of pain, echoed from the speakers and throughout the house. "Shh, shh. It's just a little fire, nothing to worry about." As the screams and shrieks continued, the man eased back into his chair, sipped his wine, and smiled. If you like what you heard, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends. If you'd like to, you can follow me at Twitter. The handle is @FuzzyPantaloons, and I'll see you all next time.